Under the fields of Northamptonshire runs 1.5 miles of perfectly straight dark brick tunnel. No trains have used it in almost 60 years. For half a century it sat sealed and flooded, forgotten. And yet today, £1 million hypercars are driven flat out through that same darkness, testing technology that ends up on the road you drive. A dead Victorian tunnel is now one of the most advanced vehicle testing facilities on the planet. Hold that question. This is the story of the Catesby Tunnel. 1. Built for a view, not an obstacle. Most railway tunnels exist because the land demanded it. A mountain in the way, a ridge too steep to climb, a hill nobody could economically cut through. Catesby Tunnel exists for none of those reasons. There was no mountain here, no impassable ridge, no engineering crisis. The Northamptonshire countryside around Catesby offered the Great Central Railway a perfectly manageable route for an open cutting, cheaper and faster to build than any tunnel could ever be. The obstacle wasn't the land, it was a man. Henry Arthur Attenborough owned the Catesby estate, and Catesby House sat exactly where the new London extension was planned to run. He did not want to look out from his own home and see steam locomotives thundering past, trailing smoke across his view of the countryside. He did not want to hear them either, so he made his objection known to the men planning the Great Central's London extension in the 1890s, and rather than fight him, the railway simply buried the problem, literally. Instead of the cheap, practical cutting the terrain allowed for, engineers rerouted the line underground for nearly 3,000 yards, purely so that one wealthy landowner would never have to see a train. Think about what that decision actually means. Every yard of brick, every ounce of labour, every extra shilling spent boring through solid ground instead of simply cutting a trench across it existed because of a private view from a private house. The railway didn't need this tunnel, Attenborough did, and so a piece of infrastructure that would go on to outlive the man, outlive the railway line itself, and eventually become one of the most valuable pieces of automotive testing real estate in the world, began its life as nothing more than one rich man's demand to be left undisturbed. There is something almost poetic in how completely the railway capitulated. The Great Central wasn't a struggling company scraping together its London extension on a shoestring. It was building the last great main line into the capital, engineered to a grander, more expensive continental gauge than any rival, chasing an ambition nobody else had matched. 2. 30 million bricks in 2 years. Work began on the 18th of February, 1895. The contractor, Thomas Oliver and son of Horsham, had a target that would be aggressive by any era's standards, let alone the 1890s, drive a tunnel nearly 3,000 yards through the Northamptonshire clay and limestone, fast enough to keep the rest of the London extension on schedule. They used steam navvies, mechanical excavators that let crews cut and remove spoil far quicker than pick and shovel work alone, and the tunnel rose out of the ground at a pace of roughly 110 yards a month. 9 construction shafts were sunk along the route to let multiple crews attack the bore simultaneously from different points, rather than waiting for one advancing tunnel face to crawl the entire length. It was industrial-scale Victorian engineering moving at industrial-scale Victorian speed. The finished tunnel took an almost unbelievable 30 million bricks to build, all of it lined in hard blue engineering brick, chosen for its strength and its resistance to water. 5 ventilation shafts were sunk into the tunnel's length, 4 of them 10 feet across, and a 5th, at the northern end, widened to 15 feet for extra airflow. The whole structure was completed in just over 2 years, finished by May of 1897. A tunnel built not because the ground demanded precision, but because the schedule did. And here is the detail that nobody involved in 1897 could have possibly understood the value of. Because the terrain never actually required a tunnel, engineers had no obstacles forcing them into curves or elevation changes. Catesby Tunnel was built dead straight, on a gentle, near imperceptible gradient, wider and more generously proportioned than most tunnels of its era needed to be. It was precision built for no reason at all, a piece of accidental perfection that would sit completely useless for that purpose for well over a century. Compare that to almost any Victorian tunnel of comparable length. Most were fought out of hillsides that twisted with the rock, curved wherever geology demanded it, narrowed wherever the ground made anything wider too costly. Catesby had none of those constraints, because the ground was never the actual problem. Engineers designed it the way they'd have designed an open cutting, then simply put a roof over it. Nobody on that site in 1897 was thinking about airflow or repeatable test conditions. 3. A quiet, unremarkable career. The first coal trains ran through Catesby Tunnel on the 25th of July, 1898, and for the better part of 70 years, that is simply what it did. Coal, passengers, freight rolling between Sheffield, Manchester, and London along the Great Central's ambitious main line. There was no drama here, no headline disaster, no dark chapter the way some tunnels of this era collected. Catesby did its job, mile after mile, decade after decade, entirely without incident. That, in its own way, is exactly what makes what happened next so strange. This wasn't a tunnel people were desperate to be rid of. It wasn't unsafe. It wasn't notorious. It wasn't cursed by tragedy. It was simply outrun by economics, the same quiet arithmetic that killed thousands of miles of British rail in the 20th century. The Great Central Main Line had always been the most expensive way to get between London and the Midlands, built to a grander continental loading gauge than most of Britain's rail network, designed with an ambition that never quite matched the traffic it carried. By the 1960s, Britain's rail network was being ruthlessly rationalised under the beaching cuts, a nationwide reckoning that closed thousands of miles of line the government judged surplus to requirements. The Great Central's London extension, elegant and expensive, and always somewhat underused, was an obvious target. The line through Catesby Tunnel closed for good in September 1966, 68 years after that first coal train rolled through. There was no ceremony, no farewell run for the crowds. A tunnel built because one man refused to watch trains pass, his windows simply stopped carrying trains at all, and the countryside above it went quiet. 68 years is a long career for infrastructure that never should have existed by pure engineering logic, longer than most human lifetimes. Long enough that whoever remembered the argument over Attenborough's view was almost certainly gone by 1966. The tunnel had simply become part of the landscape, unremarkable in exactly the way its builders never intended, a footnote to a railway line closing, not because it had failed outright, but because Britain's post-war network had far more track than the economy could justify keeping. 4. Sealed, flooded, and repeatedly rejected. What happens to a tunnel nobody wants anymore? For Catesby, the answer was thorough abandonment. Both portals were sealed after closure, without trains running through to keep it dry, and without any maintenance crew checking on it. Groundwater began finding its way in, and kept finding its way in for decades. The tunnel that had once moved coal at speed slowly filled instead, section by section, until much of its length sat underwater in complete darkness, inaccessible, and essentially unknown even to the people living directly above it. But unlike many abandoned railways that simply fade into permanent obscurity, Catesby kept almost getting a second chance, and kept losing it. In 2000, Chiltern Railways floated the idea of reopening the route as far as Rugby, or even further, restoring passenger service along at least part of the old Great Central alignment. It went nowhere. Later, a private freight consortium called Central Railway proposed using the old track bed, tunnel included, as part of a new intermodal freight corridor linking Liverpool to mainland Europe. That went nowhere too. Even High Speed 2, Britain's flagship modern rail project, briefly considered a route through this same stretch of Northamptonshire during its planning phase, before engineers ultimately chose an alignment several miles to the west. 3 separate serious proposals, 3 separate collapses. Every single attempt to give Catesby Tunnel a future as a railway again failed to materialise, one after another, decade after decade. By any reasonable measure, this was a tunnel whose story should have ended exactly the way most abandoned Victorian infrastructure ends, quietly, permanently, and completely forgotten, its blue brick lining slowly dissolving into flooded darkness, with nobody left who remembered why any of it had been built in the first place. Each failed proposal added another layer of finality, even if nobody framed it that way at the time. A railway seriously considered for reopening once and rejected is unlucky. One considered 3 separate times, by 3 entirely different operators with 3 entirely different visions: passenger rail, freight, high speed, and rejected every single time. Starts to look like a place the future has simply decided not to use. By the early 2010s, Catesby had outlasted its own obituary more times than almost any dead stretch of track in Britain. Still sitting there, still flooded, still waiting for a use nobody in the railway industry could find. There's a particular kind of limbo in being rejected this repeatedly. A tunnel that was simply demolished would have a clean ending. 5. The idea nobody else had. In 2013, a small group of engineers looked at this flooded, sealed, repeatedly rejected railway tunnel and asked a question nobody else had thought to ask. Not can this carry trains again, but what else is a mile and a half of dead straight, brick-lined tunnel actually good for? The answer came from a company called Total Sim, a computational fluid dynamics and aerodynamics firm working alongside a newly formed partnership called Aero Research Partners. What they saw in Catesby wasn't a failed piece of rail infrastructure. It was something the automotive industry had never had access to before: a full-scale, real-world aerodynamic testing environment, long enough and straight enough to let an actual car reach genuine speed under genuine airflow, with none of the compromises every wind tunnel on Earth has always forced engineers to accept. Traditional wind tunnels test scale models, or stationary full-size cars with air blown artificially over them, always fighting a problem called blockage, where the tunnel walls distort the very airflow being measured. Catesby had no such limitation. Its cross-section was enormous by comparison, 40 square meters of open space around a moving vehicle, letting engineers put a full-size car, driven by a real driver, through real air, at real speed, completely undisturbed by artificial constraints. No scale models, no blockage, no wind that has to be manufactured instead of simply driven through. The conversion was not cheap. Roughly £15 million went into transforming the flooded Victorian bore into a usable facility, later supplemented by several million more in regional development funding. Crews pumped out decades of standing water, resurfaced the tunnel floor in one continuous, seamless run with no bumps larger than a few millimeters, and rebuilt the portals to allow controlled, secure access. None of it happened quickly. From that first design phase in 2013 to the tunnel's official opening in December 2021 was the better part of a decade, with planning permission secured in 2017 and years of structural work following. A century of railway ambition, 50 years of flooded silence, then another 8 years of quiet conversion, work most of the public never saw. When the tunnel finally reopened, there were no sensors visible, no wind machines, no obvious markers of what made the space special, just a long, dark, empty tube of brick, now finally put to use for the one thing its accidental precision had always been suited for. That gap between 2013 and 2021 tells its own quiet story. Pumping out 50 years of accumulated groundwater alone was not a weekend job, and neither was verifying that Victorian brickwork left untouched for half a century could safely support decades of high-speed vehicle testing without structural failure. Engineers had to survey every meter of the bore before a single test could be scheduled, checking for water damage, brick degradation, and shifting ground that nobody had monitored since 1966. It was, in its own way, as demanding a piece of engineering as the original 1890s construction, just conducted in reverse, restoring rather than building, working to painstakingly undo everything half a century of abandonment had done to a tunnel nobody expected to matter again. 6. Racing's other secret tunnel. Catesby is not the only dead railway tunnel that quietly became a testing ground for speed. In Pennsylvania, a sealed turnpike tunnel called Laurel Hill spent decades as a salt storage shed before a racing team owner realized what a straight, private, weatherproof mile of darkness was actually worth, turning it into a secret testing facility for IndyCar and NASCAR programs. The idea, it turns out, keeps arriving at the same conclusion by different roads. A long, straight, enclosed tunnel is one of the rarest and most valuable pieces of real estate in motorsport, and almost nobody realizes it until a piece of dead infrastructure is sitting there for the taking. But Catesby dwarfs it, where Laurel Hill runs just under a mile. Catesby stretches 2.7 kilometers, nearly 3 times the length, giving engineers far more room to accelerate, hold a steady state, and decelerate safely within a single run. It has also become a serious tool in professional cycling. Elite teams now travel to Northamptonshire specifically to use lasers and helium-filled soap bubbles inside the tunnel, visualizing airflow around a rider's body and refining positioning down to fractions of a second that can decide a race. Manufacturers use the same darkness to hear things a normal test track never reveals: wind noise, cabin acoustics, the subtle sound of air moving over a shape at genuine speed with no ambient wind or passing traffic to mask it. What began as one landowner's demand that trains stay out of sight has become a facility that some of the fastest machines and fittest athletes on Earth now travel here specifically to use, all of it happening inside the exact same silence Henry Attenborough once paid so much to guarantee for himself. The comparison to Laurel Hill runs deeper than just scale. Both tunnels sat abandoned for decades before anyone recognized their value. Both were rescued not by railway enthusiasts trying to preserve history, but by outsiders from an entirely different industry who saw dead infrastructure and asked a question nobody inside the railway world had thought to ask. And both now operate in a kind of quiet secrecy, tucked away from public view, doing work that competitors would very much like to see and are simply never allowed to. 2 abandoned railway tunnels, 2 accidental fortunes, built a world apart by men who never met and would never have imagined what their tunnels would eventually become. Henry Attenborough wanted trains hidden from view. A century later, that's exactly what makes this tunnel worth millions. Machines going faster than he ever imagined, completely unseen. If you've explored Catesby before its conversion or worked the old Great Central Line, tell us in the comments.